al-Jawzi, the author of the famous Halqa-i-Iqbal, or the Devil's Deception. They were actually very closely associated with Sufism themselves. Ibn Taymiyyah took Bayat initiation in the Qadri order, and he was certainly critical, highly critical, of particular practices and philosophies. But it didn't really occur to him to question the entire institution of Sufism. So that is the radical difference in the modern era, where you have a kind of attempt to make a complete break with the past and to reject one aspect of the tradition. And so I think it is still worthwhile to go back and to see how the early Sufis defined themselves with relation to the central Islamic texts, with the Islamic legal practices, and with the key terms and concepts of Islamic theology. And I think if we have a full understanding of this entire history, that will be a much sounder basis for understanding of the character of Sufism. Thank you very much.
Now the floor is open for discussion, and you can, Dr. Hans has kindly agreed to take a few questions. The staff has paper slips and writing material for you, and by the time I receive the first question, I have a brief announcement to make. Dr. Ernst will deliver a lecture on the 6th of February, 12:15 p.m. entitled Manifestations of Beauty in Sufism at Shakir Ali Auditorium, National College of Arts. Those who are interested may arrive at the auditorium at 12 for the entry passes. His next lecture would be on the 7th of February, again 12:15 p.m. Sufism, Islam and Globalization. Shakir Ali Auditorium, National College of Arts. And his third lecture would be on the 10th of February, 11 a.m. Islamic Ethics from the pre-modern to the post-modern, to the post-colonial. The same place, National College of Arts. And today's lecture, as well as these three lectures, have been arranged by a graduate program in Cultural Studies run by National College of Arts. And today's lecture was by the courtesy of the program in collaboration with Iqbal Academy. Yes.
Dr. Ernst, given the fact that mysticism is one of the prominent shortcomings of every religion, and given the fact that Islam at the present is a mystical faith, and given the fact, as you mentioned, that Sufism has at best has a distant correlation with Islam, what would you suggest the major steps in order to restore Islam in accordance with its pristine principles, away from this Sufism or mysticism?
Yes, please.
Well, I'm just a little bit unclear about the way that you took my remarks. I was not intending to argue that mysticism was either a shortcoming or a benefit, but I was describing its characteristics. So I did not imply that mysticism itself is something negative. I also did not mean to say that I was not arguing that Sufism has nothing to do with Islam. I am pointing out that there are certain people who have said that, and there are also people who have argued the opposite. So it's a contested subject. As for the last point, I would respectfully declined to offer a solution for returning to the principles of pristine Islam. I don't think that's my job. I think that that particular debate is something which is characteristic of modernity, and I think that it would be good for people to start to also think about recent history as well as the origins of the Islamic tradition, and look at all of those things together. I think that just from a historical point of view. I think that it's going to continue to be, the future of Sufism will continue to be contested and debated. There will be people who will be favorable to it and those who will be opposed, and it also tends to take new and different forms. For instance, as I mentioned, in Turkey, it's been illegal. The Sufi orders, the dervish orders as they're called, were, the tariqas were abolished 80 years ago. Sufi associations still exist, but informally, and some of them take the structure of cultural, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and are engaging in social service and activities like that. I think that the most important place that, one thing we have to always remember about Sufism is it's very local. It's never something which is generalized or completely detached from a particular place. And it's clear that every Sufi community is linked to certain personalities, to the silsila or chain of teachers going back to the Prophet, and to the concrete physical locations of mazars, tombs, and shrines and the like. So I think that probably the best places where people who are associated with Sufi ideals can work is locally, because although it is possible to make network connections outside of your own location, world peace is a big problem, and I think everyone can contribute towards it is doing something beneficial. Oh, okay. This is interesting too, from Mr. Washington. Is there a relation between the anti-colonial movements in Islamic countries and areas during the past few centuries and Sufism? There is, although it's not a one-to-one relationship. In the 19th century, which was a high watermark of European colonial expansion, one of the things which happened after the elimination of local elites, of local dynasties and power centers, was that in a number of places, the only coherent social groupings with any power were Sufi silsilas and orders. And so in certain regions, in North Africa, for instance, the Emir Abdel led Qadri groups against the French for about 20 years before he was defeated and exiled to Damascus. In the Caucasus, everyone is familiar with the story of Sheikh Shamal, whose example is still something which is critical to the self-image of the Chechen resistance against Russian authority. And so you can point to a number of examples like this. And I think even, for instance, the struggle of the Sudanese Mahdi against the British in the Sudan in the late 19th century could be seen in part as a kind of a anti-colonial Sufi resistance. The army of the Mahdi was always referred to as the dervishes. Of course, there were some Sufi leaders who ended up working very closely with colonial rulers that happened in Punjab and West Africa and other places. So there were some places where Sufis were in an anti-colonial resistance, and other places they ended up cooperating with foreign rulers. These are all related. Okay, thank you. I think a number of people want to come back to the modern period and ask what possible relevance can it have. And I perhaps dodged the question at first, so that's why I have three people asking it now. There was a recent discussion in the University of Leiden at the Institute for the Study of Islam in the Modern World, where a number of Muslim intellectuals were gathered to discuss some issues related to this. And a Southeast Asian scholar raised the notion that Sufism could be an important principle for bringing back ethical introspection and integrity to modern societies. The Iranian scholar Abdul Karim Saroush objected to this. Although Saroush is actually someone who relies very heavily on the Masnavi of Rumi in his own philosophical explorations, and he's now in exile from Iran. Saroush felt there was an element of authority in Sufism that would always remain problematic. In other words, the authority of the peer. Now, I don't think that criticism is necessarily the final word on the future of Sufism, because we also see a lot of people who are trying to engage with it in a non-authoritarian way. And I mean people who are drawn into, personally drawn into the poetry of Rumi, to Ibn Arabi, to various exponents of Sufi teaching. And I think that some of this plays out in the realm of culture. You may question some of the manifestations of this, like I was just mentioning the musical, industry around Qawwali. But on the other hand, I think it's true that people get something out of this that they can't find elsewhere, even if there are commercial aspects to it. And so I think that the importance is this. Let me go back to something about the way in which Sufism is described in the earliest texts. It is described as an ethical ideal. I'll give you a couple of examples. Nuri was asked, what is Sufism? You find this all the time in the early texts. And he said, it means that you prefer others to yourself. It's a teaching that he's giving there. It is an ideal that he is presenting. And you can understand that, even though you may not be able to act on it at that moment. But that is what the technique of Sufism offers, is the opportunity to visualize something that is higher and better than yourself. And that is perhaps one of the keys to any kind of human progress. So I think that's what Sufism offers as a method. As to how it is done, that's up to other people to decide. Okay. All right, this is another one from a different point of view. Why don't we let Sufism be apart from all the religions and let the seekers of light and teachings come towards it without letting their religious beliefs hamper the subject? Sufism like a Gnostic approach. What do you say? Some people are advocating that. And I think the people who would like to have Sufism be a kind of generic mysticism are those same people who are opposed to authority. And this is part of the configuration of individuality in the modern world. It means you have the choice to take what you like from different sources and go your own way. Now, this does raise other problems. Problems about what is the nature of community. If you end up having a completely self-dictated path, it is difficult to see exactly how that can form the basis for a community that can be aspiring to something that is a realization it hopes to attain. So I think this is something that certainly people are trying, but it's not exactly clear what the result would be. So I don't have any stake in this. I'm just trying to report this in a kind of observer fashion. Now I have one question which I'm going to avoid, which is someone asked to describe the most active Sufi order in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh at present, which is independent of governmental control. I don't think I want to get in any political trouble on that one. Okay. All right. Now, why do nation states suppress Sufi practices? Why is opposition to Sufism becoming popular in the Islamic world, what's a conflict between modern Sufis and modern Islamic rulers, and so forth. So I think that there probably are a number of reasons why there has been an opposition to Sufism. And if you look in Arabia in the 18th century, when Ibn al-Wahhab got his start, the rhetoric of the Wahhabi movement is directed against any form of intermediary between God and humanity. And certainly there is a form of mediation that takes place in the Sufi tradition. I think that's undeniable. There was also a considerable amount of wealth and power tied up in the Sufi shrines. I think that's one of the reasons why the Wahhabi movement opposed them, and that's also the same reason why Kemal Ataturk suppressed the Sufi orders, because it was an alternate center of power. In other words, when you have an external social manifestation of a powerful kind of teaching, it is going to be in competition with other sources of authority. This is why nation-states are nervous when they see 1 million people getting together to pay their respects to someone they respect more than they respect the government. So, on one level, it's a contest of authority, and I think also one might say that the rhetoric of Wahhabi teaching and of related schools of thought is based upon only one way, only one understanding, and the teaching which they advocate is identical with the will of God. That's a pretty powerful statement to make in society, because it means that there's no other attitude you can have except either to accept or reject it. And so, in that kind of situation, and we see this around the world in different religious traditions where this fundamentalist type of argument exists, conflict is actually part of the way in which it grows, because that's a way in which one asserts one's authority. So I think that's, in other words, the debates about Sufism are not so much about Sufism as about the other centers of power and what their aims are. So it's really a kind of political issue, in effect. All right. Okay. Well, now this is a nice, very sophisticated question. In one of the initial slides you've shown, you said that the wrath of God overwhelms the attribute of mercy and love, which are also attributes of God. Don't you think that would be an imbalance in the attributes of God? You're quite right. I didn't mean to imply that the element of wrath overwhelms the mercy. Actually, what I meant was it overwhelms us. It overwhelms the human heart. In fact, there's a well-known Hadith Qudsi, which God says, my grace outstrips my wrath. My grace is faster than my wrath. It gets there first. And so I think that, according to that, we would have to give priority to the attributes of mercy. So, and then there's a second question on here. This is a very tough one. How can we say that the experience of any Sufi is authentic when we cannot find commonality of experiences between two Sufis? Well, I'm not sure how to satisfy that question. And I think that lies just on a completely different level of experience than I can address. Because that's a question that really has to be decided individually according to criteria based on one's own perception of ethical and spiritual quality. So I think this one is up to you. How will Sufism be beneficial to humankind and the values practiced, how are they helpful to the following Islamic rules and legislation in modern, it must be areas. Okay, and also, has Sufism any negative effect on the future life of modern man? Well, of course, you see, I think we have to keep remembering that when we use the word Sufism today in English, it's really not the same as tasawwuf when it occurs in the original text, because that tasawwuf is really that sort of ethical ideal that I mentioned. Tasawwuf is the ideal, and when we use Sufism as a modern term of the ideologies, it's more like a sociological description of everything that is associated with it. So in other words, from a sociological point of view, every qalandar and malang is also included in the picture, even though they might be on a very different path. So in other words, there are people who have, as it were, a protest agenda and who are unconventional in rejecting the norms of society. That is an issue which I'm not going to try to resolve, but it certainly exists. There's a long history of this, and there's a constant debate in the old sources about whenever we find the notion of the true Sufi, we also find the false Sufi. This is from the very beginning of the writings that we have on the subject, over 1,000 years ago. And so there are those who are trying to articulate the ideals and ethical goals, and then they point out, well, there are these people in Basra who say, we feel close to God, so we don't have to pay attention to the law. And I think you're probably familiar with this kind of discussion. All I can say from the sort of historian point of view is that the free-thinking, antinomian, unconventional approach has existed as part of the overall sphere that is associated with Sufism, historically speaking. And is that something which is negative? All the people who have been enchanted with the Mast Qalandar song evidently find something positive in that image as well. There's something about freedom, there's something about getting away from the stifling conventions of ordinary morality. But I'm not going to try to resolve this, and I'm not, after all, here as a mullah, but simply as a student of a fascinating part of culture and history. So I think we've gone through the questions, and I hope I satisfied some of them, but thank you very much.
Dr. Ernst, thank you all for being with us. Since we are running into Maghrib prayer time, I would like to conclude here. Yes, thank you very much.
Hello.
So, I hope that was a little bit interesting.
Mine is the bad one.
Right.
Can I have your card or?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
You're usually staying here for like how long?
About a week.
About a week?
Yeah.
Where are you staying here?
I'm staying with my coach.
I used to study with this. You remember Zetuna Institute, you know Zetuna Institute? Zetuna Institute?
Yes.
Yeah. So we brought their heads, they were pretty famous in those days. Actually, I wanted to know, like, what are your comments about Sheikh Numin Kaller's opinion on Sufism?
Yeah.
You know Sheikh Numin Kaller, right?
Acha.
You know Sheikh Numin Kaller?
I don't know him personally.
No.
Yeah.
But, like, you have read his text. Like,
it's
famous there.
Right, yeah. I think it's an interesting example of...
Because he's written a lot of
Yeah.
Sufism.
Yeah, he's trying to engage with the North African tradition of
Maliki.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting example by somebody who's coming from an American background, trying to engage with the tradition.
Yeah, that's like modern. Like most of the people ask, like who in the modern world is engaging in the Sufism, right?
That's right.
So he's like one of the pioneers, right? In that side. So like I can send you my question on this, and if I want to call you these days, are you flexible or?
They have a pretty full schedule for me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm back in Lahore after about 6 years.
Yeah. I'm back in Lahore after 8 years, but
you probably have family.
Yeah.
What's in this? Some notes, but and correspondence. Right.
Do you know Mr. Sharif Al-Qawli, who is teaching in Harvard these days?
No, I don't know.
You actually, the most confusing part of the lecture was that you considered a lot of topics in just a very short time. You're considering comparative religion, you're considering Iman, then Ikhlas, and not talk of, Islam fiqh. Yeah, but like, there was, like as you have talked about Iman, contacted, connected to Ikhlas and Sufism, right? You haven't talked about like the intellect that is necessary. That's why people I think most of the people said that is practice necessary for Sufism. That's what I think.
Right, yes, you had a question. Well, yes, because the doctrine of Wilayah is very early, although it was probably developed first in the Shia imams. Because they're first, and we see with the circle of Jafar, his thought was very important for the early so I think that there's some shared understandings about Wilayah here, but it's very important. And there are people in Central Asia, has Khatam al-Wilayah in the early 1900s. So it's a very big topic. And of course, Nadaza in Kashf al-Mahjub, very important discussion of Wilayah. It's good to read. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
I'd like to know, your name is Ernst, that means is very serious person, and that is the oldest name of German, and that is the German name.
Yes, well, my ancestors were Swiss, so yes. But I try to laugh occasionally.
So it was very nice and helpful lecture.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully you will get in touch with you.
Sorry?
How we can talk with our member? Do you know this way?
I don't understand. Talk without...
Almighty contact.
No, I don't know.
I tell you we talk with Almighty God every time. I know.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
I got a question.
Yes, yes,
About that
Right?
quick.
It's a quick one.
And you
I'm a fan of Imam Ghazali,
Yes.
Al-Ghazali, right?
Yes.
What I want to know is his views on philosophy, right? On Islamic philosophy
Right.
at that time.
Yes.
They're still very credible, aren't they? They're still, although he does have critics, but it is what he did, like the revival of religious sciences, was massive.
Yeah, it's still extremely important work, and also he was engaged with Greek philosophy in a very complicated way. There had just been discovering some new texts in the recent years. There's one discovered in the British Museum, and I'm just about out. And then also in Iran, and he has a very strong critique of Ibn Sina and Greek philosophy, but also his methods very close.
You know, I just missed your seminar. How are you today? I want to come down. Are you having a good talk?
Yeah, actually, you'll find out from our host here. I have 3 talks at the National College of Arts.
Okay. 2 talks beginning tomorrow.
6. Historian which is thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Are you arranging schedule?
Oh, really? Oh, yes.
Acha. So who is
Copy or program piece? Okay, great. Thank you very much. ये सब कुछ लिखो सलीम भट्ट वाला. Oh, very good. Very good. North Carolina. Yeah. Chapel Hill.
Tay sao
I have. Okay. Just tell me what.
Would you like to read Mr. Iqbal? He's the only polyglot in my company. And a very close friend of Madam Shimel.
This one, you will find something. So I've just I have here one is your selection of
I have an anthology also.
Oh, I see.
That's right. There is one Sufism, heritage thing, that which is publishing the English translation of various Sufi texts in America.
Yes.
About Father Fuad and many other Sufis.
Oh, the classics of Western.
Classics, yeah, in that series.
The Paul Press. Paulus Press, yeah, of course, yes. Which also did the Sat Maidan and Ibn Iqbal's work and Ibn Arabi's, yes.
No, I haven't. I wrote an introduction for Michael Sells. His
Early Islamic mysticism.
Oh yeah. Because I before you, I only know North Carolina only from mystical laboratories. The first
Don't
edition was
forget
published.
Bueller.
No, I know Bueller. No, the first one, first reference. That was published from North Carolina.
You know, Duke University is next to it. So Bruce Lawrence and I, we work together.
Bruce B. Lawrence, yes. Distance flute.
Right.
So, thank you very much. I'll read. Inshallah, but go through this. There's one small idea by Vijay. Other things will meet in your other.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
We're interested about your lecture. I hope I can get to meet
Sure. That would be great. I contacted with a couple of Chinese scholars. Well, actually, one is in Taipei. Yeah.
But I think our institute is the only institute of religious studies in China.
And you are in Beijing?
In Beijing. And I'm now a visiting scholar.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that's great.
And
be in touch. Wouldn't that be great? I've never been in China. It would be a big thrill. But anyway, so and you can see my website here. I have a lot of material publications.
Actually, your research work, like I would like to read some of it. Is it on your website?
Yeah.
Most of it?
No, not complete books.
I can go ahead and
some articles are there.
But I can request. I never want.
Can I hold it? Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. It's nice to have
gifts of books, but they tend to accumulate. By the end of your visit,
But I think you deal with the other bit. Do you pass it? Yes.